Climate Actions Pathways, Episode 10 on US President Joe Biden's convened Earth Day Leaders Climate Summit from April 22-23rd, virtual. We are facing climate change, which is runaway. And just now, we are also amid US President Joe Biden's convened. Some of our panelists today, leaders now hit by from April 22-23rd, virtual. We are facing climate change, which is runaway. And just now, we are also amid climate catastrophes. Some of our panelists today were now hit by typhoons. Ambassador Olai Uludong from Palau, she just mailed me that her country is facing a typhoon and her house is underwater. There is no electricity, no water for drinking, nothing. And there is no communications as such. And our friend, former SBI chair, Amina Lobi, he is from Fiji. Ambassador Olai Uludong from Palau, she just mailed me that her country is facing a typhoon and her house is underwater. There is no electricity, no water for drinking, nothing. And there is no communications as such. And our friend, former SBI chair, Amina Lobi, is also facing that climatic catastrophe. And our friend from Nepal, Manjeet Dhakal, who has been in the negotiation for quite some time, and a spokesperson for LDCs for years. His house is also battered by winds and also gusty rain. He is from Fiji, is also facing that climatic catastrophe. And our friend from Nepal, Manjeet Dhakal, who has been in the negotiation for quite some time, and a spokesperson for LDCs for years. His house is also battered by winds and also gusty rains. And there is no electricity, no water, nothing. And his rooftop was also blown away. Right now, right here, climate change, everywhere, every country is facing. And there is no electricity, no water, nothing. And his rooftop was also blown away. Right now, right here, climate change, everywhere, every country is facing. So right now, in this conversation, I am pleased to have amid us Paul Witkinson from France. He was SBI chair and also in the negotiation process for many years. But today, he has joined us in his personal capacity, and we have with us Bangladesh Permanent Environment and Climate Secretary Ziaul Hasan, NDC. He is our leader of the delegation. From Bangladesh, we have with us Matti Nummelin from Finland, who has also been in the climate negotiation for very many years and was in LDC expert group for many years. And we have Mattias from Mattias is also following climate change negotiation for many years. And we have Gottfried, who is from Germany, a good friend, good soul, has been in the negotiation for very many years, but from 2017, he has not been in the negotiation, but he is very keenly following the negotiation. So, and also we have Sarah Millar from Climate Emergency Coordination Group from England, and we are expecting a couple of others. Zaheer Fakir has joined, but somehow I don't know whether his electricity is there or not. So this is a problem for virtual meetings. We have seen, we have experienced this even in the past couple of episodes. Without much ado, I would now like to say that we are expecting that 40 leaders summit virtually will be quite productive to ramp up, galvanize momentum gained so far for COP26 in Glasgow come November. But in between, we are going to have a virtual subsidiary bodies meeting from 31st of May to June 17. It is an extended meeting because of logistical challenges like different time zones and virtual disruption and so on and so forth like this. So without much ado, I would now like to request Paul to kick off the conversation, because you has been a veteran. You has been in the SBs and also COP process, and you are from France. Paris Agreement, how to implement it is a because it is your baby. So we are carrying it. So Paul.
Thank you very much, Quamrul, for the chance to take part in this and to see many faces, very familiar faces, and I hope some others who will be able to join us too. I won't talk about the paternity of the Paris Agreement. I think it's the product of many actors. It's much more complex than that. But I want to start by where we are and the science and what's happening. And I think you've already made startling explanation of what's happening to many people today with the stories you told us of what's happening to Olai, to Amina, to Manjeet. I mean, that really sums up the challenge we face. Climate change is not a theoretical concept. It's a reality that people are living and which is going to get worse. And the question is, how do we address that? And how do we slow it down to make it manageable and to deal with it? And if I also look at the atmosphere and look at CO2 concentrations, recent figures show that in 2020, CO2 concentrations increased by 2.6 parts per million over the level of 2019. And that's in a year when emissions fell by 7% because of the impact of the massive economic impact of the pandemic. So even when our emissions fall a little tiny bit, those concentrations are still rising. And in March, they were reaching 417.64 parts per million in Mauna Loa in Hawaii, and they've been touching almost 420 in the past couple of weeks. That's dangerously high in terms of the temperature that will produce and in terms of the impacts which will come. And it's still increasing at a scarily high, fast rate. So I think the first point in looking towards the summit, in looking forward to the rest of the year, is very much that we are not in anything like the right place. We're going the wrong way. The situation is already very serious. And the action to slow things down is going to be absolutely critical. So I think the Paris Agreement, for me, having been part of its making, as many of you were, is a vital guide to the international community. It sets out limiting to 1.5 degrees, the NDCs, all of the tracking and centralized pieces. And then the cooperation around it that we need to deliver. But the Paris Agreement, in the end, it's a piece of paper. It's a book. It's that. In itself, Paris Agreement has not solved climate change. Its implementation, its action, its delivery, its cooperation, that's what's going to deliver the solutions we need. And I think for our leaders who will be meeting in a few days' time at the invitation of President Biden, I think that is what they need to be focused on. It's the strengthening action, setting targets for 2030, which are much higher than those we have on the table. We know that we're nowhere near on track. Those targets need to be aligned with the ambition we need. It's the setting action so that by 2050, we're really moving collectively to carbon neutrality and net zero emissions. But it's not enough just to have announcements. It's the action, the policies, and the delivery which go with it. And I know that the action is not just on mitigation, it's also on adaptation, because even at 1.5 degrees, the impacts are going to be worse than they are today, and we will need to work together on that. And it's the support, and I know how strongly that part is essential. The delivery needs to be there. I'll say two more things briefly, and then I'll stop. The first is clearly we do have some implementation of the rules of the Paris Agreement to finalize. When I was chair of Substa, I failed to reach agreement on the rules for Article 6. I very much wish my successor, Tosi, success in solving that between now and Glasgow. And I'm glad to see this decision to have an informal session in June. And I very much hope the parties will work hard to deliver not just informal, but real results and progress during those 3 weeks. We clearly need the reporting tables, agreements on common timeframes, and taking forward finance, and certainly where we're going on adaptation will be critical. So there's a lot to be done there. But all of that's taking place in the context still of the pandemic, and that's severely disrupted our working arrangements. That's why we're all talking on Zoom all the time and other tools. I very much hope we can soon get back to working together in person, because that personal relation, the ability to work together is vital. But we need to make progress whilst waiting until we can do that. We cannot wait longer. But we also know that we need to build back better. And I think for our leaders as well, thinking about the recovery from the pandemic, integrating fully the action on climate change in there is absolutely central to the challenge we have. It's a huge opportunity as well. And that's part of the wider transformation of investment that we need to align it with 1.5 degrees, and the transformation of our international financial systems. I think some of the comments recently, say from the IMF, on how we start to deal with debt in the poorest countries facing climate change, to bring that in. These are signs we need to start thinking in a much broader term about that transformation. And finally, I think we also need to think and I hope we can get our own process back on the track very shortly. But I've always defended the UNFCCC process. It's very hard with almost 200 countries with very different interests and concerns, vulnerability, responsibility. And yet I think we'll also need to think how to make our process more fit for purpose for the years to come. More into implementation and delivery. So I think there's a lot there. But I think the focus for our leaders in the coming weeks must be the putting us on track for 1.5 degrees and really building that into all the other policies, particularly the recovery, which is so vital in front of us.
Thank you, Paul, for your excellent setting the tone, flagging almost all points to be covered in this conversation. As if I was hearing you as SB chair or delivering at contact group as a contact group co-chair or as a lead negotiator. So thank you very much for your reflection. Zaheer Fakir has joined us. Welcome, Zaheer. Can you also have your say video on? Then I can ask you to have your reflection, your expectation for Leaders Summit and also COP26. Zaheer, can you hear me? Zaheer? I don't know whether he has lost his connectivity again. Anyway, I would now like to request Matti. What is your take for Leaders Summit on Earth Day? Will it be a special day?
Thank you,
Are you
Quamrul.
expecting some positive, good news?
Yeah, I think so. There are good reasons to expect good news. Good news because I would say that although we are suffering from COVID-19, but it also gives us an opportunity that all the countries have, most of them have a huge recovery packages. And for example, in my country, 60% of the recovery package is going for the sustainable development, for the green recovery, and for the climate-friendly technology and climate-friendly innovation. So, in a sense, I would say that this COVID-19 has also been a lucky incidents that we have to take an advantage that there is now a lot of free money floating around, and we have to be very careful that it's wisely used for good of all of us, and also I would say that when I look President Biden's very short White House statement and what is he expecting? He mentions the private sector, and I think that also in the private sector there is new thinking that fossil fuel is history. So it's not anymore profitable to invest in fossils, and that's something which gives us hope. And I must say that also that in President Biden's short introduction, he also mentions, for example, the non-state actors, and of course, young people have been the ones who have more or less, I could say that they have taken the lead. So they are pushing us for the better future, and when I attended before this same climate channel, I said that I have joined now proudly to climate grandparents. So we are supporting the young people as a grandparent, because we feel that we are the ones who can vote. The young people cannot vote, and we have to show the political decision makers that the grandparents are really worried on the future of the young people. So I think that this is my short introduction.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. You are absolutely right, and we expect that President Joe Biden's climate summit will be successful, because it is in 1970 Earth Day. The Earth Day movement was launched, and then we have seen that in United States, the green agenda was unfolding, especially creation of US EPA, Environment Protection Agency, was created, launched, and this time also on Earth Day, we are going to have some good news, some landmark we can see that will help the negotiation in whatever form, virtual or physical, that will galvanize the momentum for COP26 in Glasgow to help full and effective implementation of Paris Agreement, which is so dear to my distinguished friend Paul. So I would now request Bangladesh Permanent Secretary for Environment, Climate Change, Mr. Ziaul Hasan. And this.
Okay. Thank you very much. At the very outset, I thank the Climate Channel to incorporate me into this conversation. I see there are so many experienced and distinguished personalities who will be contributing in today's conversation. On behalf of Bangladesh, this is very much inspiring for us that the United States have got back to the legitimacy of their huge contribution in fighting against the impacts of climate change. And a few days back, the US Presidential Special Envoy, Mr. John Kerry, visited Bangladesh to invite our Honorable Prime Minister to join the upcoming Leaders Summit scheduled on 20-23 April of this year. We are pleased to see that taking into account the role of Bangladesh to combat the impacts of climate change, being with the international collective efforts, and Bangladesh is very much committed to do its best to make as much as possible with its limited resources and capabilities. And Bangladesh wants to see the major emitting countries truly committed to the pledges, to their commitments given in the Paris Agreement. Given that the United States and the other industrial nations have adequate potentials and adequate capabilities to solve the crisis, at the first instance, they should be committed. They should go for implementation and delivery of the pledges, the commitments they provided in the Paris Agreement, then the climate vulnerable countries like Bangladesh and other countries will follow them. So this time, as the US government has got back to the Paris Agreement, and the US President's Special Envoy, Mr. John Kerry, have already visited a number of countries to take on board all the potential leaders of the potential heads of government, heads of states of the potential countries of the globe to gather them in the Leaders Summit. We are very much optimistic that they take into account the seriousness or the very vulnerability we are being experienced, and taking into account the future devastation. They will this time be very much pragmatic and very much action oriented, and go for better perform their role as to the highest ability. My aspiration is that this time something better will come out from the summit.
Yeah, thank you, Zia, for your say reflection, especially Bangladesh, as you are leading the process or updating the NDC of Bangladesh. I know from close length that you are leading this process to have an ambitious NDC for Bangladesh, and also Bangladesh National Adaptation Plan, and then also updating Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan, which we have crafted in 2009. And also Bangladesh.
Just one sense I would like to add that during the visit of Mr. John Kerry, has shown keen interest to support Bangladesh in the areas of the needs of Bangladesh. And we have already listed the areas of cooperation, and shortly will present the areas of cooperation Bangladesh wants to have from the US and the other developed nations during the Leaders Summit to our Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to say that Rebecca Peters from Chatham House, UK, has also joined us. With that, I welcome Rebecca, and I would now like to request Gottfried, my friend. What is your reflection for Leaders Summit and then COP26 in Glasgow? God, yeah, you have been in the process, and especially you hammered on us many times, many nights. So yes, now it's your turn.
Sometimes we were negotiating the whole night through, right, on loss and damage, and we did not get lost and damage.
Adaptation.
Yeah.
Climate finance.
Yeah. It's really nice to be back with you in such an informal setting, and also best regards to some familiar faces apart from you, Quamrul, and thanks for the invitation and initiative. After I quit the climate process, I led the division at BMZ supporting the 2030 agenda. And it was interesting, coming from one multilateral process, switching to another one. And of course, in terms of let's say the legal strength, the climate process and the Paris Agreement is much more forceful than the 2030 agenda. 2030 agenda is much softer, voluntary national reviews only,
much flexible,
and so on. It's not ratified by countries, but I learned also the power of these multilateral agreements, which is not, let's say, do not have a direct, do not lead to direct action, but they set a framework with targets, and the Paris Agreement has some very specific targets on mitigation, on climate finance, and on adaptation. And also the 2030 agenda has some very specific targets. However, many things are being changing into the right direction, but we also experience backlashes, as we've experienced with the United States, for example. And this whole transformations of economies and societies is in your countries, in LDCs, and in small island development states, but also in, let's say, newly industrialized countries, or in the traditional industrialized countries, is putting a lot of pressure on the societies and on the economy. And therefore, I think it's also, and there I learned also about the strength of the 2030 agenda, because we always need to consider all the three dimensions of sustainable development in order to get the transformation towards meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement right. And I think this counts in particularly now, since we all the countries in the world are facing many problems because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And not all countries have economically so powerful as, for example, Germany or other countries, in order to, take up quite a number of debts in order to restart the economy. But we do, and also we have also in my Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, my colleagues have developed a concept of recover forward. Recover from the crisis, but recover in a different manner. The UN Secretary General has framed it recover better. So it's just very similar. But of course, one needs to address the direct impacts of the pandemic. And then, of course, one needs investment, but we need to do the investment right, so that it's geared towards meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement. And I think that's a challenge, but I think it's possible, and it's a huge chance. But we need to do things right. We do not need to. We should not invest anymore in fossil fuel, in coal-fired power plants. And we would need to find other ways. And this does not count only for Germany. This also would count for Bangladesh, for China, for the US, for just any country.
For all countries,
And I think we need to look much more on this, how to do transformation of whole societies. also in order to avoid backlashes. I mean, the whole crisis has also increased inequality tremendously in all countries. And inequality, although it is not really directly related to climate change, can also endanger efforts towards more climate change on emission mitigation or climate change adaptation. Okay. So we need to be very careful on that. So that's my message. It's not really related to which paragraph in the Paris Agreement. Exactly. I could be more specific on the adaptation side, but I leave it as such. Thank you very much.
I'll come back to you again. Don't worry, my friend. I just know that Charles Dickens, in his A Tale of Two Cities, London and Paris, he said, in his first sentence, he said, it was our worst of time, it was of our best of times. So now under COVID pandemic and climate crisis, climate emergency, we are at the worst of our time. And hopefully we can turn it, transform it, God, into our best of times. So that is the challenge and expectation from, say, Leader Summit come Earth Day, April 22, and also our June meeting in virtually, then also physically, hopefully in Glasgow come November. With that, I would like to ask Mattias Soderberg, who has been in climate justice group for many years. He has also been hammering on us many a times in the negotiation so that we try to ensure justice, equity, and also the balance of the planet, Mother Earth, integrity of the system, integrity of the mechanisms. So with that, I would ask Mattias, now it is your turn to reflect.
Thank you, Quamrul, and thank you to the Climate Channel for taking this initiative. It's indeed important to address climate change, and I'm representing people and communities on the ground around the world. The people we are working with in the ACT Alliance, they are the people suffering of the effects of climate change. And from their perspective, we really need action. I would like to start just following up on Paul Witkinson, because Paul mentioned the need for cooperation and partnerships. And I think this is also the main reason why we have a UN process addressing climate change. And when we talk about the upcoming COP26 and the things which are on the agenda, these are the things where we need to cooperate and where we need to act together to solve this global crisis we are facing. But everything cannot be done globally. We need action on the ground. We need action reaching the people and the communities on the ground. And this is where I think the Leaders Climate Summit, the 22nd of April, will have a role to play. Because hopefully this will be a space where leaders make commitments and talk about the bold actions they want to take. This summit is not a space for negotiations. We have the UN space when we negotiate, but the Leaders Climate Summit is a space where we hopefully can get inspiration and can get encouragement from leaders from different parts of the world. And I will, of course, look especially towards the US and see what kind of national climate plan, NDC, they would like to present, or what kind of targets they want to present. But I will also look towards all the other countries which are present, because we need these actions, and we need to make sure that they are not just statements and beautiful speeches, but they are turned into concrete activities. Hopefully, if we get some ambitious actions coming out from the Biden summit or from the leaders' climate summit, this could feed into the UN process, inspire parties and to create some good energy. Because I'm afraid when we left COP25 in Madrid, the energy was not on the top. We really need to get some good input to the process, and hopefully the Leaders Climate Summit can do this. I would just also shortly mention what kind of actions I would like to see, because it was...
then I'll come back to you again.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, yeah. So thank you, Mattias, for your reflection. Now I will turn to Rebecca Peters from Chatham House, UK Sport. She has also been following our work, our negotiation, and also climate change process. So what is your expectation from Joe Biden-led Leaders Climate Summit next week? And also say virtual meeting of SBs in May-June this year. Then also G7, G20 in the run up to Glasgow COP26. Rebecca, your take.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be in such distinguished company today. I'm Rebecca Peters, the Leland Foundation Academy Fellow at Chatham House, working with the Energy, Environment and Resources Group, which is really involved in the work leading up to COP26. You know, as an American and as someone who wants to feel very proud of my country and what it can accomplish leading up to COP26 and raising ambition and setting the scene, rebuilding multilateral relationships and really rebuilding trust in America and what it's able to promise domestically. So if I may, I'd like to kind of paint a brief picture of where things are and where things stand in America, unless that's already been done. And I apologize for joining late. Thank you for your patience. But what I'd like to say is that, in the United States, of course, we're coming off of 4 years of an anti-environmentalist president who undid a legacy of environmental protections, yet the Trump administration was not the first kind of not super supportive government that the U.S. had, and arguably long preceded Trump. We didn't ratify the Kyoto Protocol. America hasn't really meaningfully considered climate policy since it's failed to pass carbon pricing over a decade ago now. So the U.S. hasn't really had kind of a climate president, and arguably Joe Biden represents this kind of the first administration that has made a whole of government policy to integrate climate experts across all of the government, which is different even from Obama, who yes, had climate change as part of his platform, but had kind of siloed specialists and experts that were scattered across government rather than actually working together. Giving John Kerry a position at the National Security Council really changed the dynamic, and I think really raised the platform of climate change across government. And that is really important scene setting for what we might be able to see coming out of this. But we're also seeing really conflicting signals and sort of competing demands. So, while President Biden canceled the Keystone XL pipeline, he hasn't shut down the Dakota Access Pipeline. Last month as well, by the Biden administration, allowed a former finance minister from Australia who had called climate pricing a very expensive hoax to become the new Secretary General of the OECD when it could have not supported that vote. And now we're just days away from this leaders summit. So what I'd really like to see would be an extremely ambitious NDC, at least one that rivals, if not tops, what we're seeing from Europe of over 55% reduction at minimum, where I think everyone's hoping for a minimum 50% reduction. I'd also really like to see that the US considers revising its position on a number of international agreements. I think it was Gottfried who mentioned the value of these multilateral agreements and setting a framework. The US is one of, I believe, 2 countries that is not, for example, a signatory to the Convention on Biological Diversity. I think it would really send a strong signal that this government takes this seriously, it takes its position internationally very seriously, and that wants to honor these commitments both at home and abroad. You know, as someone had also pointed out, this isn't really necessarily the time for negotiating. This is the time for coming together, for building America's position. But at the same time, the world has changed. Since the US pulled out of Paris 4 years ago, the world moved on. Europe and China arguably became the climate leaders in many respects. No one wants to take a second seat to the US now that they know what it feels like to have this other position. So I think the US should think less about establishing leadership so explicitly and more of thinking of how to be a more effective team player, which is a new role for the US really to be considering in this respect. You're used to having a seat at the head of the table, and now everyone's kind of sat shoulder to shoulder, I hope. And I hope that that role will be one that the US can get more comfortable with. And thinking about climate diplomacy leading up to COP26 and during COP26, not as branding things as an American intervention, but rather as a collective act of faith on behalf of what is truly a planetary emergency, or is a threat to our collective.
Okay, Rebecca, I will come back to you again.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. And Sarah Millar, I would like to come to you to hear you very briefly, so that we can have another round.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Quamrul, and thank you to the Climate Chat channel. It's wonderful to be in such great company. I wanted to build on a lot of what Rebecca had said and was just starting to say. I think she's absolutely right. You know, the rest of the world has moved on. It's not 2016. And I think rather there is this element of the US sort of getting the band back together again. And so you have this feeling of a lot of the Obama administration individuals coming back in, and that gives us all a sense of comfort and reassurance that, you know, the grown-ups are back, which is really reassuring. But at the same time, it's not 2016. And so it's not like we just skipped a beat and we'll just carry on where we left off. It's 2021. And as Paul was quite rightly saying, you know, the impacts, they're more severe, they're more regular, we're feeling them all the time, they're not just anecdotal. And so to pretend that the world is the same as it was in 2016 in lots of regards is not the right way to go. It worries me a little bit that the expectations are so high, that, you know, the US is back, multilateralism is back, and that's not necessarily the case. And I think over the course of the last month or so, with a lot of Chinese tensions, we recognise that it's a very difficult paradigm that we find ourselves in. And the US is really keen to establish its credentials and establish its leadership, and sort of throwing its weight around is the wrong word, but I think, you know, they really feel sensitively that they have to demonstrate that they're back. If the NDC is not where we expect it to be, that honeymoon will be very, very short. And we already know, and people have already said, that there was a lot of energy sucked out after Madrid. We've had this period of COVID and not being able to meet. The lack of personal and physical contact is making negotiations really, really difficult. So to then have some of that energy further sucked out this week would make things even more difficult. The other point I would like to make as well is that, and lots of other people have alluded to the fact that so many of the climate decisions this year will take place in other international fora. You know, they are not negotiations issues, but they will put energy and excitement and expectation into the negotiations if they go well. But how do we collectively sort of sweep up some of those moments to inject it back into the process, back into the UNFCCC process? And I know lots of people are thinking about it. Certainly my organisation is thinking how we do that.
I will hear from you, say a couple of minutes after. Okay, and Sarah, thank you. I would now like to request Paul. You have been in the process for many months, many long nights you have spent. We have seen that we need a lot of negotiation times, negotiation weeks before a conference of the parties. And this time, almost 1.5 years we have lost in COVID, not to have any physical meeting, not to have any coordination among the parties within regional groups, regional settings like G77 or EU or say African group or say LDCs or AOCs. Then again, we come together in the plenary, in the contact group, in the informal, and also corridor meetings and various parlays. Then also we need lot of leaders meeting, but this time we are not going to have that, at least for some time in the near future. So it's a huge logistical challenge. It is huge challenge for our negotiators. So how our negotiators can cover the space, how our political leaders can cover that space, that parlay space, diplomatic space, so that we can have a fruitful discussion on the floor of negotiation. Paul, your wisdom, your wise words, you have always guided us, took us at the end of the tunnel and showed us light. Paul.
I don't know about light. Tunnels, I fear we're in. I don't really have much I can add to that. And I think what others have been saying, I think what Sarah and Rebecca were saying a few minutes ago about links to other processes and the way we need to think in that broader sense as well. I pick up on those as I think important. It's not only what we do under the UNFCCC, it's all the preparation. I think there is a negotiation challenge this year in preparing Glasgow. I think there's an increasing amount that's being done online, despite the difficulties we have, the access problems, the time zones, and the lack of human contact, which do make it difficult to deliver through those ways. But I think the biggest challenge we have now isn't the negotiation, it's the delivery. That's not to say there is no negotiation as we move forward. There is still things we need to work in that format. And there's almost 200 countries. Our differences are still strong, and that requires a lot to overcome them. But it's above all focusing on delivery, and that's at a national level, a local level. It's mobilizing all those other actors out there, local government, business, civil society in its larger sense. And that delivery is the change we need. And it's how do we really use the time we've had this year, last year, not just not negotiating, but thinking, how do we make a better world? And there really is a huge need for us to be thinking in wider terms about how our economies work, how our societies work, how our international institutions work. The UNFCCC is a central part of it. It needs to deliver, it needs to be there. But we can't only focus on that side. And I think our leaders in particular in the coming week and the rest of the year need to be looking in that broader sense, the transformation we need and the really bringing in of the climate challenge, the biodiversity challenge, and the wider justice challenges we have in the development agenda as we take this through all of our processes ahead.
Thank you, Paul. Rebecca, I had stopped you. Now you turn to compensation. It's a compensation.
No trouble. You know, I think I'd like to pick up on that point about equity that Paul mentioned, of equity and justice. You know, it's the equity consideration is one that has been going on for a long time. The prevalence of the common but differentiated responsibilities, will continue to further develop, especially as many countries that were considered to be low income then are now rising income or even middle income now, but may not have been kind of reclassified as such. And there's widening income inequality, widening inequality in exposure to environmental risks. And I think an acknowledgement of that shifting dynamic at COP26 and how funds are distributed between countries and within countries will be really critical to that. Re-empowering the agencies and groups GCF and GEF that are responsible for allocating funds will be really important. And even within the US, I'm glad to see that Biden's infrastructure bill, American Jobs Act, thinks very explicitly about equity considerations within the country as well. And I hope that countries are developing their own policies are considering that consideration quite explicitly as well.
Thank you, Rebecca. Gottfried, you are talking about adaptation, loss and damage, and you gave me tough time in adaptation negotiation and loss and damage negotiation. So now it's your turn.
Yeah.
How do you see?
Yes, this was very tough. But I was always aware we need tough. On the other side, one needs to be responsive in order to reach an agreement. Yeah, and that was very important. And I think we delivered or we developed the loss and damage issue from a black and white issue, from compensation or no compensation to a more diversified understanding about how to manage risks. And
how to transfer risk.
Yeah, and of course, how to manage this includes transferring risk. Yeah, and I think we have came quite far. And I know that for example, risk financing is not a polarizing black and white issue anymore. Yeah, and also under climate finance, also not in the GCF. Yeah, so this is very important. We managed to involve the whole global insurance industry to get not to place our risk only there, but to use them to mobilize more funding we need to manage risks. And that was I think very important also to use their expertise in structuring these risks so that we get a much better picture how to, which risks can be taken, which risks can be reduced, which risk needs to be transferred, and how this risk transfer can be financed. And my colleagues, Christoph von Stechow, who is my successor, and he's still on the job, he's done a lot. We are now, for example, funding through the Potsdam Institute for Climate Research, risk analysis for all our partner countries, including Bangladesh. Yeah. So this is, we get much more specific on that. And I think that's a huge progress. Yeah. So I'm happy that we've come that far. And of course, negotiations are far from being over. But I agree with Paul that we shift the focus away from the last bits and pieces, and which needs to be negotiated. And of course, negotiations will never end. But the focus is much more on delivery and implementation, and I hope that that's also helping the request which was posed by, for example, by Mattias, that we get more specific on that, and much more broad and more finance is leveraged, going into risk financing and so on. and I'm very positive on that. Yeah.
Yeah. And got your another pet subject is M&E.
Yeah.
You also organized a couple of M&E workshops. So I would now like to go to Matti Nummelin. You are in the LDC expert group and also help LDC countries prepare NAFA for adapting to adverse impact of climate change. Now NAF is on its say formulation phase, and then it will go to say implementation phase. So you take Matti.
Thank you, Quamrul, and it's easy to continue what Gottfried just said, because looking at White House short message, the last bullet point, which is going to be discussed next week, is strengthen the capacity to protect lives and livelihoods from the impacts of climate change to address the global security. And really, I'm happy to hear that what Gottfried just said, that there are mechanisms now that how we can solve this, and certainly, of course, the developing world needs help, and that is something what I'm absolutely sure that is going to be discussed next week. And one thing I would like to bring here, that I also understand that the important issue will be in adaptation, also the nature-based solutions when we are suffering now the biodiversity crisis. So there are two things to solve with the same
linkage
solution.
with the Biodiversity Convention and also Desertification Convention and other conventions. We have Montreal Protocol, or say Stockholm Convention, Rotterdam Convention, all these conventions, and also treaties, agreements, so that we can align, and also SDGs, alignment with SDG goals.
Yes, and whatever we do, I must remind that we have to do in a gender-sensitive manner.
Yeah.
That I'm happy that UNFCCC has now the gender action plan. Right. So I think that we don't have too much time, so I end here.
Okay, thank you. Now, Sarah, I have stopped you. Now you can share your take. Sarah.
Thank you. I wanted to elaborate a little bit on how we catch these other moments in the course of the year. I think it's great in a way that climate is permeating in the Gs, at the IMF, at all of the other important international meetings. It demonstrates that, you know, the seriousness of the challenge is being met by a serious international response, you know, in that it is on the agenda. And then it's what Paul was saying, how do we move it from being on the agenda and being talked about into action and delivery? And I think how we bridge that gap this year is absolutely crucial. Quamrul, as you were saying, you know, we haven't had any negotiations since Madrid. We know that things are really difficult. So if we can move these conversations along and injecting aspect of it and wrapping it up back into the UNFCCC process to give the UNFCCC process some much needed energy and some physical contact time, I think we'll have had a good success this year. But it's not a given. And I think,
we're not giving,
as I said before, if we have a disappointing leaders summit around Earth Day, I think it will make it even more challenging. So the expectations are high and the jeopardy is high.
Right. Okay, I think with that say high note of optimism, I will now come to Ziaul Hasan.
Okay, thank you. In the context that we are facing the greater consequences due to COVID pandemic across the world, and the climatic adverse situations more prominent and more severe in 2021 than ever before. The good sense of all the countries will prevail, and like other distinguished participants, speakers, I say that they will go for stronger delivery and concrete action on the ground, associating all the stakeholders, including the affected people, and will take into consideration the vulnerabilities of most vulnerable countries like Bangladesh, the risk coming from climate-induced disasters and climate resilient activities. This is my message.
So, thank you. God, what is your final message? What is your final message?
Yeah, my final message is that this year is very crucial to square the circle between a recovery from the economic, social impacts of the pandemic and setting the world on a, at the same time, setting the world on a new path towards meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement without by avoiding repercussions. You know, that there are people, powerful sources outside who are not in line with, who don't want to support the Paris Agreement, and that they do not win over it. So we need to be very smart, very inclusive, I think, and provide a message of hope, of opportunities, in order to better be able to convince others who are not convinced yet that this is the better way.
Thank you, Bert, for your very positive note, and also summarizing your take. Rebecca, what is your final message for the world?
To thank you and thank the Climate Channel, and it's hard to top what's been said, but to echo Gott's comments, I think that in the messaging about climate change, there's a lot of doom and gloom, and it's easy to feel quite hopeless sometimes. In the US, the rhetoric has kind of come full circle. So I'd say that the important thing is to embrace that sense of hope and opportunity. With clean tech comes new jobs, comes new growth and new forms of and ways to participate in the new green economy, which is very exciting. And just briefly to say that I think that the role of climate diplomacy, building out of that kind of positive view, must be one of, of contextualizing what climate means. It's not just any other foreign policy issue. It's not just trade. It's not just democracy. It's not just human rights. It's so much more. It's inclusive and encompassing all of these other kind of traditional bread and butter foreign policy issues, and must be treated as more than the sum of its individual parts.
Thank you very much for your very second comment and message, final message. Paul, we are in climate crisis. Crisis in Chinese means opportunities also. So can we turn this crisis into an opportunity, into an economic boom, economic revival after COVID? So green climate deal, can we have that? Paul, your final message.
Sorry, the sound wasn't terribly good. I've spoken enough, I think. There are others, including, I think, Zaheer, who hasn't said anything yet. So, I think it is about action. It's action and delivery, and I think that's where the focus needs to be.
Excellent. Matti, you are a workaholic man. You are always at work. You know how to make others to work. In, say, LDC expert group, you made others to work. So now how you can make our leaders to work, our negotiators to work, and also common masses of the people across the world, how they can be rescued, how we can work for them. What is your final message?
Well, two things. First thing, what I think is the most important, that we have to give people hope, and that hope can then lead to action and the real results. And that's why we all do have look for the brighter future and work for that and believe on that. And my second final message is that there are good development. There are already now, according to latest analysis, over 30 countries which have shown decoupling of the economic growth to the growth of the CO2 emissions. So that's possible. So we can do it. That's my final message.
Yeah, we can deliver. We can do it. Mattias, you have been hammering.
Thank you. And just my final word and expectation to the Leaders Climate Summit is that we do not forget the people on the ground, and also that we therefore also consider the need for locally led adaptation, for loss and damage action, which is actually helping those who are losing something or their futures. And this is also what I will listen for when I follow the Leaders Climate Summit. What will the leaders say? Will it be only wonderful and beautiful words, or will there be commitments which actually can help people on the ground? So that's my final word.
Thank you, Mattias. You are always very precise and concise. Shara Millar, your final message.
Thank you. Yeah, just to echo what others have said, we have to have hope. Hope leads to action. Action leads to delivery. And if we don't have hope, then we'll descend into a swamp of despair. And I think there are plenty of other people doing that. And we need some positivity. It's very challenging, but we have to be hopeful.
Thank you. Ziaul Hasan, what is your final message?
Yes, we have to be action-oriented in a true sense, and we have to be sensitive to the countries that even then they have the aspiration to take part in the process to combat the adversity of climate change, but in some of the areas they deficient. So the industrial nations should come forward to support them orderly within that means. This is the final.
Thank you. Thank you all the panelists for your prudent comments, reflections, takes, and also your expectation and optimism. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of independent India, on the 14th August 1947, in the middle of the night, he proclaimed that we are of destiny. And I also recall that in Darwan, on the final night, that we are in the Christ of destiny. And that destiny will be determined by next week's Earth Day Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C., of course, virtually, with 40-some leaders, including our Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina. And also our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib, he also said that we are indomitable and nobody can put us in their dominance. We will rise to the occasion, we will deliver. And he delivered our independence in 1971 after a bloody 9-month war of liberation in 1971. So we can rise to the occasion and deliver at Glasgow in 1971. So we can rise to the occasion and deliver at Glasgow come November. And with that expectation, I would like to end this episode 10 of our climate conversation, climate action pathways. Hope to see you in our next episode or next episode in the days ahead. Thank you very, very much. Thank you from Climate Cycle.
Thank you very much, Quamrul.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul, Inclusia, Rebecca,
so much
for dropping in. Gottfried, nice to see you again. Sarah and Mattias. Matti, my friend. So,
bye-bye.
At least we met. We have seen each other. Yeah. And shared a couple of say minutes together. So thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to have you all, and hopefully see you in one of our next episodes, especially on 24th. After the summit, we are going to have 2 episodes, one on 24th, one on 26th. So I extend our invitation to you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
With top investors putting climate change high on their agendas, more tech companies are launching software that can help oil and gas producers keep track of their carbon footprint and show investors they are serious about controlling emissions. Software giants SAP and Salesforce have both launched